Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the second high-level meeting of the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency on the occasion of UNEA 5.2, Strengthening Actions for Nature to Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Tim Nixon, founder and former managing editor of Thomson Reuters Sustainability, and today's discussion will feature two 30-minute sessions focusing first on the increasing importance of the circular economy in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and the second more of a sector drill down, looking in detail on the role of the construction and textile sectors in leading us towards circularity and biodiversity protection. UNEP's Executive Director, Ms. Inger Anderson, will conclude our session today with some closing remarks. Kindly note that the webinar is recorded and live streamed on YouTube. And please note also that pictures or screenshots will be taken throughout the webinar, and attendees may ask questions in the Q&A tab. And depending on the time left, and I do say we have a fairly packed agenda, I will address these questions to one of the panelists. So to get us started and to set the context for our sessions today, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tsuyoshi Michael Yamaguchi, Minister of the Environment of Japan, and Dr. Gerd Müller, Director General UNIDO, who will each make some opening remarks. So Dr. Yamaguchi, I invite you to turn your camera on and your microphone on, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Hello, distinguished participants. It is my great honor to welcome you all to the second high-level meeting of the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency, or GACERE. This meeting is held as the UNEA 5.2 side event under the title of Circularity and Nature. Let me express my deepest gratitude to UNEP and UNIDO for jointly organizing this meeting. We are facing three global crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental pollution. To address these issues, we must transform our socio-economic systems into more sustainable and resilient ones. Circular economy not only reduces pressures on biodiversity, but also has the potential to restore ecosystems. To strengthen actions for nature to achieve the SDGs, which is the overall theme of UNEA 5.2, transition to a circular economy is a must. Today, we are launching the GACERE working paper, Circular Economy and Biodiversity. This working paper analyzes the role of the circular economy in maintaining sustainable ecosystem. I would like to thank all GACERE members for their efforts to complete this working paper and hope it will serve as the beacon light for the world. Since the last high-level meeting of the GACERE in September last year, we have been able to adopt the Glasgow Climate Pact and complete the Paris Rulebook. At Japan's Circular Economy and Carbon Neutrality side event at COP26, ways and means to collaborate for realizing decarbonization through a circular economy were discussed. In order to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, countries need to work hard for greenhouse gas emission reductions. Japan will implement its nationally determined contribution, aiming to reduce our GHG emissions by 46% by the year of 2030, and continue strenuous efforts to meet the lofty goal of 50%. Japan's Prime Minister Kishida, in his policy speech to the Diet in January, stated that climate change is the greatest challenge to overcome. We will achieve the NDC and carbon neutrality by 2050. We are preparing the circular economy roadmap to be completed by summer in order to accelerate the circulation of all resources, which is indispensable to achieve carbon neutrality. Lastly, regarding the plastics, we promulgated the Plastic Resource Circulation Act last year to facilitate the circulation of plastics across the entire life cycle of plastic products, from product design to waste disposal. For example, as for straws or spoons, they will be required to be made of materials away from plastics. The law will go into effect from next month. In addition, we will actively contribute to the development of a new international legally binding instrument on plastic pollutions, including those in the maritime environment. We will share our initiatives and exchange views through the GACERE. We will further collaborate with GACERE member countries like a family towards the global transition to a circular economy. I hope today's meeting will stimulate momentum to strengthen our actions to conserve the nature through a circular economy. Together, we can do it. Thank you.
Dr. Mueller, are you with us today?
Yes.
The floor is yours, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Minister, I would like to welcome you to the second high-level meeting of the Global Alliance on Circular Economy, and sincerely thank you, co-host Japan, dear Minister, Khalid, and Ianf, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in difficult times. Not only are we facing the COVID-19 pandemic, we are facing conflicts, war in parts of the world. And let me say, peace is the precondition for development and the future of the planet. We also have to face accelerating climate change and the rapid loss of biodiversity. The IPCC report this Monday confirms that the impacts of climate change are occurring much more rapidly than anticipated. We produce more waste than we can handle, we consume more than we need, and we pollute our environment, nature, forests, oceans. I hope for an ambitious resolution on plastic pollution as an outcome of this year's UN Environment Assembly. This would be an important signal that we are taking the climate and biodiversity crisis seriously. Excellencies, dear Minister, natural resources are the basis for everything we do for our life. The way we produce right now is not sustainable. We are not using our natural resources efficiently. Our linear economies waste far too many resources. We have to change this. We only have one planet. To achieve this, we need to transform our industrial production system and the way we consume. We can do it. Yes, we already have the knowledge and the necessary technologies to make it happen. UNIDO's priority is to make this knowledge available for everybody worldwide. Progress by innovation. Circular economies, for example, are based on innovations in technologies, new materials, renewable energy sources, product design, and social change. On the business side, circular economy solutions can help them to reduce their use of energy, materials, water, and chemicals. This means less waste, less pollution, lower costs, and improved competitiveness. Consumers are also changing their habits. The young generation is much more aware of sustainable consumption options than we, the older generation. Yeah, and the young generation finds innovative ways of protecting the environment. We need fair and sustainable value chains worldwide. That is very important. Think about this. Fair and sustainable value chains worldwide. from Africa to Japan, to China, to Europe, from Latin America to Europe, worldwide. The industrialized countries have to take on the responsibility for social and environmental standards worldwide. I'm thinking, for instance, about the mining industry, but also in construction, communication, and with regard to circular economies. Excellencies, UNIDO, the UN, the Industrial Economic Development Agency, can play a major role here. Let me emphasize some of my priorities as UNIDO's new Director General, where we support circular economy approaches. Through sustainable agricultural practices, we prevent soil erosion and desertification. Through circular food systems, we avoid food waste from farm to fork. And through sustainable buildings and infrastructure, we reduce the use of cement and other construction materials. The main issue is how to decouple economic growth from resource consumption and CO2 emissions and biodiversity loss. That is the main issue. Together with partners, UNIDO is establishing a knowledge base to compare the costs of nature-based infrastructure with traditional infrastructure. We plan, for example, to apply this in our eco-industrial park program worldwide, or UNIDO's circular economy and resource efficiency initiatives helps SMEs in Indonesia, for example, and the southern Mediterranean save millions of dollars in production costs to significantly reduce the CO2 emissions, energy, material, and chemical consumptions. Only two examples. Excellencies, dear Minister, I look forward to working together with you, our partners, and the private sector to promote solutions that work. I wish you a good discussion today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yamaguchi and Dr. Mueller. That's some great context setting on the importance of decoupling economic growth with environmental damage for our discussion now. I'd like to move us on directly into session one on the circular economy and the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. I'd invite all the speakers in session one to please turn your cameras and microphones on at this time. This session will last approximately 35 minutes, and we've got a lot of material. And I will ask each of our 7 speakers at least one question, perhaps more. And I'd like to ask the speakers to limit their answer to no more than 2 minutes, please. And as time allows, we'd like to encourage brief comments on each speaker's intervention. But I'll have to be a bit strict, unfortunately, on keeping us moving so as to make sure all of the speakers have at least a question and an opportunity to participate with their answer. So on we go to question 1. This question is addressed to Ms. Elizabeth Mrema, Executive Secretary of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And here's the question. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, quote, aims to galvanize urgent and transformative action by governments and all of society, unquote. Could you please update us on how we're doing towards this goal? Ms. Mrema, are you able to join us? Is your connection working? Okay, great. Did you hear my question?
Not really. I was just joining, actually.
Okay, let me say it one more time. First of all, welcome to the meeting. The question is the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and this is quoting from the document. Quote, aims to galvanize urgent and transformative action by governments and all of society. And we'd like you to just give us an update on how we're doing towards that ambitious goal.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for the invitation. Indeed, we are in the process currently of developing the post-2020 framework, as you have mentioned. But this framework will only be transformative or ambitious if all stakeholders are equally involved in its development process to be able to participate in its implementation. So actually what has happened in this COVID period has given us that extra time to do that, has been the time to engage different stakeholders, to consult them, and the co-chairs of the process have done so well, engaging indigenous peoples, local communities, engaging the youth, the women, the private sector, particularly here I refer the business, the financial institutions, all of them. And when one looks at the draft framework at the moment, all stakeholders, I think I can dare to say so, they can see themselves, be it the youth, be it indigenous peoples, local communities, the financial institutions, the business, all can see themselves. So what we expect when the framework, once it is adopted, that it will be a framework for all, universal, for everybody to contribute to its implementation, including us as individuals. If we only do that and everybody is engaged, then we'll make a difference in this one earth we have and one planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a minute or so for any following comments. Would any of the speakers on the current panel like to make a comment on Ms. Marema's call? Very well, then. We're going to go on to question 2. Mr. Gunnar Andreas Holm, Ambassador of Norway to the Republic of Kenya and Permanent Representative to the UN Environment Program. Mr. Holm, from an environment and energy perspective, what would you add in terms of the most important next steps on transformative action and this urgent call?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for being able to be here today. I think that 3 points, taking a long-term perspective and sustainably managing our resources. And that is the key for Norway, and that is key for many other governments. And to say that we must shift from a consumer-based linear economy to a circular economy. I think that is very clear that that is the way to move for our resources to stay longer in the value chain. And I'm just reminding myself sometimes what has happened in my lifetime from when I was young and to today, when we first started handing in old bottles and getting money for it to be able to buy something else for that, to the systems that we have today of waste management. And we are on the way, we are on the right track, but we just need to scale it up. And this is not about being uncomfortable. It's not about sitting in cold living rooms, but it's about warming those living rooms in a smarter and more sustainable way. Secondly, what the president of UNEA said this morning, we are nature, as the president said. So nature forms the very basis of our well-being, and more sustainable management of natural resources. I think we see that that is essential for green growth, green jobs, and working with and not against nature to find the solutions that are needed. And again, we are trying to take a long-term perspective here for protecting biodiversity and vulnerable ecosystems. Finally, another important point that was emphasized by the executive director of UNEP, Mazinger, this morning, and that is we have to base our activities and policies on evidence, the true truth, I think she said. And GACERE is one mechanism here that we really find very, very interesting, really support. And because GACERE is one of these mechanisms that actually deliver that kind of evidence to inform policy making. So to sum up, I think that we are on the right track. We need to continue, we need to scale it up, and we need the difficult but vital importance of getting the buy-in from all stakeholders there. Private sector, not necessarily the most difficult one, because they see where they can also make profits and business and things are moving along. But it's also down to each one of us. What kind of activities, what kind of changes are we willing and able to do in our daily lives? So this is a whole spectrum from me as an individual to the societal level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holm. I'd like to move on to question 3, please. And we just received notice earlier in the day that Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, CEO and chairperson of the Global Environment Facility, had unfortunately a commitment come up, but we're honored to be joined by his substitute, Mr. Mohammed Bakar, lead environmental specialist from the GEF Secretariat. So, Mr. Bakar, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
I can hear
great.
you.
Excellent. Okay, well, here's your question. Since 1992, GEF has provided close to 20 billion in grants and mobilized an additional 112 billion in co-financing more than 4,800 projects across 170 countries. We're looking for you to tell us a little bit about where you're seeing, return on this investment in terms of emerging circularity, not full circularity, but just the beginnings of it, perhaps. And is this kind of circularity to you looking scalable, potentially impactful over the next 5 years?
Thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, so I think as you rightly pointed out, indeed, this is a new area for us in the Global Environment Facility. It actually just gained prominence in our current replenishment phase, which is the 7th 4-year cycle that ends in June this year. And we invested just about $25 million from our international waters focal area and from our chemicals and waste focal area, with specific links to the other focal areas as well, biodiversity and climate change mitigation. But looking specifically as to how we can start to mainstream this circularity within our broader investment agenda. The focus of this investment was being channeled primarily on circular solutions, focusing on eliminating unnecessary plastics, fostering green chemistry for alternative materials, innovative reuse systems, and improving recycling. Basically, we are looking to these investments leading to avoiding at least 4 million tons of plastic from entering the oceans, which of course will generate tremendous benefit for biodiversity as well. So the portfolio is still relatively young, and so we don't have a real impactful outcome yet to that I can share with you. But all I can say that through that investment also, we now have a better sense of how to start engaging with sectors, different sectors, textile, electronics. We're beginning to talk about the construction sector, how to engage there to start moving into circular solutions, and not just doing it with countries who are primary clients, but also mobilizing the private sector and other entities that will help to galvanize the kind of innovative solutions that we're looking for. So we have very good progress made in countries like Ethiopia and in Nigeria as well. And so we're looking to start synthesizing these achievements and get a better sense of the scalability question that you asked. Unfortunately, I can't answer that at this stage. So let me hand back to you. Thank you.
Certainly. Thanks for the update. Would any of the other speakers like to reflect on Mr. Bakar's comment or follow up? Okay, we're going to move on to question 4. Just
maybe one word, and
yeah.
that
Yes,
the scalability. I think that is absolutely key here, and
yeah.
as we have seen over time, what seemed not possible to scale up actually has shown that it could be. So there is something about that as well, to have that the energy and the patience and the long-term perspective to see that this is a brilliant idea. It's difficult now, but to see that it is actually possible to scale it up and to make it profitable businesses. And I think we have seen quite a few good examples. Maybe we need to look into those examples and see what were the main factors that made it possible to scale it up, and why did some other brilliant ideas just die? That would be interesting to look into.
And Tim, just to wrap up on that, I think the other thing that I think will also be useful in that sense is to get a better understanding of the supply chain, to map all the actors and who are influencing that supply chain so that when we start to go to scale, everybody is on board and thinking along the same lines. And obviously, you can achieve greater ambition through that process.
Sure. I mean, Mr. Hull, do you have any specific opportunities for scale in mind when you're making that comment, or is it more of a general emphasis?
It's a general emphasis, but I think that, again, looking at some of the experience from our own countries where systems of recycling bottles, as I said, started when it gave me an opportunity to give it in, and I could buy some chewing gum and a little bit of, sweets for it, to the system today where all the tins and everything, that there's a value in all of this. And I think that's what some of the companies realized. And it started out as a small company, and today it is a world market leader in that kind of and automatic kind of recycling, receiving, you getting a receipt, you can hand it in and get money out or whatever. You can also, as we have a system whereby you can push a button and those little money, they go to local NGOs, for instance, that are also then working in the same business. So there are many ways where you can try to circulate the value of the same product several times. It's fair to say then that you're seeing increasing commercial value in integrating circularity into business models. Yeah, absolutely. And may I just one more? Sure. I lived in Ghana before coming here, and it always struck me when I looked around, and there was unfortunately a lot of plastic everywhere. But there's one thing you never see: scrap metal. Why is that? Because it has a value. It's picked up immediately by guys with trolleys. So the moment we come to where plastic, which is made of petroleum, it has a value. When we get to that point as well, we are able to realize that and recycle it, and there are technologies of returning it back into petroleum again. I mean, these are the opportunities, and technology is there, as you said, but we need to scale it up. Thanks very much for those comments. I'm going to need to move on to question 4. And this question is addressed to Mr. Rohitesh Dhawan, President and CEO of the International Council on Mining and Metals. Mr. Dhawan, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well.
Excellent. Okay. Here's the question. Mining and materials will be a crucial enabler of the transition to a lower carbon and circular economy. So what does leadership look like in the sector to enable this transition while also achieving our biodiversity imperatives?
Thank you very much for having me in this key conversation. You're totally correct that the transition to a net zero economy will be very highly minerals and metals intensive. Electric vehicles, for example, take 4 to 6 times as many mineral inputs as conventional cars. Wind turbines 9 times as much as an equivalent gas-fired power plant. As a result, our demand for metals is set to rise up to 40 times the current levels when it comes to some commodities. So in that context, the 27 members that make up ICMM, who represent the largest mining companies in the world and together account for about 1/3 of the global industry, we are committed to meeting this demand in a way that maximizes the benefits of mining to host communities and governments while minimizing the environmental footprint. That's why we were the first hard-to-abate sector to set a goal of net zero emissions in line with the Paris Agreement, and we are on track to beat our ambitious short and medium-term targets. Many of the world's largest mines, including the world's largest copper mine, Escondida, are already 100% powered by renewable energy. We've long seen climate, water, and nature as deeply interconnected. So our net zero goal sits alongside our biodiversity commitments of no net loss to nature. We were the first industry to commit to not mine or prospect in World Heritage sites nearly 20 years ago, and some sites amongst our members are already nature positive. Finally, we're committed to helping create a circular economy. We mine in circular ways, such as the Boliden mine in Jabal Sayid, which produces concentrate of copper, which of course is a key metal for the energy transition, using 100% wastewater. And we're putting principles of circularity into every stage of mining, from early planning all the way through to post-closure. And a good example here is the Sakatti mine in Finland, which has been designed in such a way that we build no infrastructure on the protected land under which it sits, and there's a fully electric fleet of mining vehicles that operates underground. Look, ultimately, the question you asked was, what does leadership look like? I think leadership in responsibly providing the metals and minerals needed for the transition means ensuring that neither people nor the planet are collateral damage in the production of those metals. We're hopefully demonstrating that it is indeed possible, and we hope to share the lessons and learn from other sectors who also share our wholehearted commitment to the SDGs. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dewan. There's a lot to talk about there. And I'm going to need to go on to our next question just to stay on time, but we may want to circle back to some of your important points. Thank you very much. Our next question, question 5, is for Mr. Virginijus Sinkevičius, Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans and Fisheries from the European Union. The question is, what one or two most important concrete actions involving consumers and manufacturers can contribute to reaching biodiversity goals in the textile sector?
Thank you very much. Ministers, distinguished delegates, and ladies and gentlemen, since it's the first time that I'm taking the floor, please let me thank Japan, UNIDO, and the UNEP for hosting this second high-level meeting of the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency. With that, I also want to recognize a milestone, that 1 year has passed since the launch of this alliance. In the margins of the first part of this session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. Today, as UNIA 5 resumes, our GACERE family has proven to be more important than ever. We've seen that the circular economy is the key in the time we are in, recovering from a pandemic while at the same time addressing the interdependent climate and biodiversity and pollution, of course, crisis. And it's about helping the planet to heal, so our children have a clean and prosperous future. Protecting and restoring ecosystems on which our societies and economies depend. Let me recall the International Resource Panel's Global Resource Outlook, presented at the last meeting of the Environment Assembly. The IRP found that 90% of the impacts on biodiversity and water, roughly half of greenhouse gas emission, and 1/3 of the impacts on human health are linked to the extraction and processing of material resources. So I therefore not stress enough the message that solving the climate and biodiversity crisis requires taking less from and giving much more back to nature. And the European Green Deal is clear about the ambitions ahead. A large part of the life cycle, health, and environmental impacts of products are determined at the design stage. And by designing products that are durable, easy to repair and upgrade, and where recovery of valuable materials and components is enabled at end of life, designers can provide the best possible conditions for material material efficiency and design out microplastics. And acting on the design phase also allows for choosing materials containing only safe chemicals and for the incorporations of recycled fibers, and that including from textiles. And in fact, this discussion is very timely, as the EU also will launch its strategy for sustainable textiles by the end of this month. And we hope that our circular economy approach to the textile value chains can contribute to bringing this sector towards circularity. The textile sector employs more than 1.4 million workers in the EU, and we consume only in the EU more than 5.8 million tons of textiles every year. So clothing and accessories comprise the largest share of EU textile consumption, contributing the most to overconsumption. So it's estimated that less than 1% of all textiles worldwide are recycled into new textiles. The impacts on our environment through its entire life cycle are significant. So therefore, the Commission will take measures to boost recycling of textiles, including providing financial support to innovation, encouraging industrial applications. And we are aiming to have, by the end of March, the EU strategy for sustainable textiles as a comprehensive policy framework that pulls all the strand of work together, providing clarity and certainty for stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sinkevicius. Our last two speakers, before we go on to our next question, our last two speakers have outlined a vision for circularity in the mining and metals sector. What does leadership look like there? And also with respect to textiles. Would anybody like to make an additional comment or add a thought before we move on to Anita Dongre, our next speaker? Very well. We may want to circle back to some of those important points on those key sectors. But I'd like to move on then to question 6, to Ms. Anita Dongre, Chief Creative Officer of the House of Anita Dongre. Ms. Dongre, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Could you please update us on your vision for the role of women to lead our transition to a more circular economy? And where are you seeing specific opportunity at the moment?
I'll begin with the role of circularity in the company. As a designer, I think, first of all, we use design today to create garments that require very less wastage. We ensure that there's minimal textile wastage when we design the design process itself. Our second goal is that we try and choose textiles. We're slowly moving towards textiles that are sustainable, because the main textile that we use in a fashion garment is the main component. And a third very important role that we try and do in the company is recycle. We recycle all our fabric waste that is created out of cutting a garment when you create a design. We engage with a lot of women, self-operated women units, where we create employment for women. So all the textile goes and is recycled into things that you can use, rugs and bags, and it's all recycled. We recycle, of course, all our plastic. We recycle all our packaging. We recycle the water in the head office that we work in. Coming back to role of women, I think in India, the role of women is really, really extremely important. I think if anything can change the Indian economy, it is the woman, and it is especially the women in rural India. So we run a lot of centers, which are self-help groups in about 7 villages in different parts of Maharashtra. I work from Bombay. These self-help groups, the women create garments for the various labels in my company. And I think taking employment back to rural India is extremely, extremely important. And honestly, I think what we need to do as people who live in the cities is really learn how to live what rural India lives like, because they treasure everything, nothing is wasted, or live like how our grandparents lived. Because rural India still lives like how our grandparents lived, and there's no wastage of any kind. So for me, every time I go and I do any kind of work with rural India and with the women there, I always come back learning so much from them, and learning to appreciate and learning not to waste. And I think that's what circularity is all about, that we do not waste any of the Earth's resources, and we treasure each and everything, and we try and recycle everything. So I'm just glad that design and fashion gives me an opportunity to do this, to bring about all my beliefs into my workplace too.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Dongre. And a sub-theme of all of these topics is that, leadership starts with an individual oftentimes. And you're talking about individual leadership and collective individual leadership. Would anybody else like to comment on, I think, this important contribution to the discussion?
I think from our side, we have seen that second-hand garments as an industry are growing. So, which is part of the concept of circularity in terms of making sure that we have reuse. So I know on other issues, we might be worried about dumping, if maybe others are seeing that as waste. But if there is an opportunity to reuse and there's a market for it, we would want to encourage that. And that is that also contributes to those enterprises, business models that would assist us to address poverty and also ensure that we contribute to the economy.
Tim, could I make a quick comment, please?
Please.
I just wanted to reflect on, I really liked Anita's point about the knowledge and insights that she gains from access to and interaction with people who engage in the Indian context in a rural environment. I wanted to draw a parallel As we know, indigenous peoples are custodians of the majority of the world's biodiversity. And what we have seen in the mining industry is that those practices of land management and biodiversity management are essential and hugely important. And often mining occurs in indigenous areas too. And what we attempt to do is to harness and work closely with indigenous peoples and their inherent knowledge in order to promote sustainable biodiversity conversations. And I thought Anita's point was excellent and a very good parallel to what we've seen in our industry too.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to add a comment? Very well. We may circle back to that theme, but let's move on then to question 7, to Ms. Sweta Stotra-Bashvam, Global South Focal Point at Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Can you hear me, Ms. Bashvam? Okay, excellent. Welcome. Here's the question for you. What's the most powerful lever that young people have to create meaningful change in time to matter on biodiversity and climate? How do we empower young people?
Thank you so much for the question. I think our greatest strength as young people is clarity. We have real clarity about understanding that the current crisis, the climate crisis or the biodiversity crisis that we see today, did not actually start with the Industrial Revolution. We know that it started with colonialism, with patriarchy, with casteism, with racism, and all the other isms. We also understand that the world we see today needs fundamental change in our values, priorities, and actions if we want to survive this social ecological crisis that we are living through today. We as young people have the courage, the determination, the creativity, the talent, the out-of-box thinking that is really needed to get us out of this cascading crisis. So what I would like to say is now looking at what we actually need. What we don't yet have is the power. Our generation doesn't have the power to make the transformative decisions that are needed to be taken and implemented. And this is the most important lever that we need to create change. We need you to make decisions with us and not for us. We want you to see us as the generation that can lead. And if you can see this, you will be able to realize that there is no better partner in the world to transform it, to truly transform it, than young people today. Thank you.
So I'd like to invite comment on this. I mean, we have a good sampling here from industry and policy, and we've heard from a powerful young speaker here on the importance of having their voice heard and being a part of the decision-making process. Would anybody else on the panel like to comment?
Just to say that, thank you very much for that intervention, and it fits very well in with both my personal opinion and I think very happy that we could this year, the national statement in Norway was presented by the youth representative. And for the first time, we have a youth representative at UNEA. And I think to make that link between what we're discussing here and the future generations are absolutely vital. I mean, some of us belong to the sunset generations, as it's sometimes called. So this is the sunrise. And there is something about, as was just said, the energy, the creativity, that's where it is. And actually they deserve it. I mean, they are the ones who are going to take over this. So thank you very much for that strong intervention.
And Mr. Holm, would you add too that they are also the customers of the future, right? So you're looking at, yeah, go ahead.
No, they of course they are, and young people are consumers, but they're also more and more getting smart consumers, and they are informed consumers. So I think that's absolutely critical for private sector as well, to realize that these are very well educated and they operate in platforms and in ways of sharing information that could very rapidly have an impact on your business and your activities if they don't like what you're doing. So to be engaging with the future generations, young people of the world today, and they are truly global, whether you live in Northern Norway or in Southern Africa or Eastern in the West. I mean, they talk to each other.
Yeah. Ms. Marema, I see your hand up. Did you want to add a comment?
Yes. Also in support of the previous speaker, the Global Youth Network on Biodiversity is a program under the Convention of Biological Diversity Secretariat. Very active and delighted to see such a strong intervention coming from the network. Clearly, the empowerment continues. I don't want to say it's enough, but the network and the youth are making us all adults to understand that the future is theirs. Us all here who are about to retire and others to retire tomorrow, we have contributed to where the polluted planet is today. So clearly, it is time to leave it to the young generation who are now delivering these messages that we have damaged the environment. This is not the earth, the planet Earth, they expect it from us. And that's why now they're even forcing us, whether we want it or not, to listen to them. And not just to listen, but to listen and act on their recommendations. Not surprising, we see more and more youth going to the streets, pushing governments to take action, going to the courts, pushing the courts to also listen, and the courts have listened to them. That's why we have landmark judgments, a different jurisdiction, literally putting pressure on government to fulfill the obligations which they've committed at global level. So bravo, the youth. We need to listen. We have to listen, no choice where we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to make a comment? Well, let me ask you if I might, Ms. Bashiam, you've heard, the reflections today so far and the comments on your comment. I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel like we're headed in the right direction here in terms of young people having more of a voice on real decisions?
I should definitely say that we are headed in the right direction. Are we going fast enough in the right direction that can actually get us to the place we need to go in time? I'm not sure. And definitely, I would say we need to go faster. And I see everybody, every stakeholder now trying to work with each other, including the businesses are trying to work with young people now to move towards creating those spaces where there's intergenerational equity, but it's still not fast enough to create the change that is necessary to create the transformative change as explained by Ibis. Yeah.
And when you mentioned business, is there anything in particular that you think a business can do or should be doing to involve young people in the process?
So to be honest about the answer here, I would say if there's one stakeholder that young people trust the least is, with real honesty, is the businesses. And the reason I think this is why we have this kind of mistrust with them is because we feel like the businesses currently have they are the stakeholder that benefits the most from business as usual, and by keeping the status quo. And they're the ones who they're the ones who are able to profit this broken system that we live in. But if we do see, if the businesses, as we can see from the speakers on today's panel, if more and more businesses and more people in this sector start realizing that our system is broken, climate change is right here, we need to think about long-term sustainability, not just for the planet, but also for their own business, then I think we can start really seeing change created in the business sector. The other thing we definitely need from the business sector is to have more transparency. We don't want them to, and honesty. There's so much greenwashing happening that we are constantly skeptical about anything we hear from them. And I think this is something that really needs to change. I mean, even if you're able to do little, I think it's important that you honestly tell us what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. Because when you tell us what's not possible, that's when young people can come in with their creativity, with their out-of-the-box thinking and say, hey, why don't we help you make that happen? And I do see a lot of businesses, a few businesses as of now at least, are saying that to us, are telling us that, these are some of the challenges that we face when it comes to circularity. These are the challenges that we are facing when we want to move towards sustainability. And if they can work with us, create more jobs for us that can, help us tackle these situations, these challenges together, I think we can really be strong allies with each other and transform the world.
Thank you very much for that. We have just a couple minutes and then we're going to need to move on to our next session. Would anybody else like to offer a concluding thought from the panel here before we move on? It does sound like young people clearly have their eye on business and no greenwashing when they see it. So I saw Mr. Dewan kind of nodding there as he was listening. Did you want to add anything to that?
Tim, I'd just say it was extremely well said. I can't agree more. We have to keep challenging ourselves as the private sector to engage in ways that eliminate the power imbalance that has existed for so many years between business and others. And so what I'm conscious of is every time we show up to the table as business, to recognize the mistrust that exists, to recognize the power imbalance as a result of the actions that businesses have taken in the past that have not respected the voices and the perspectives of other stakeholders who should have an equal seat at the table. And as you say, Shweta, the ability to be open, honest, transparent, vulnerable, fair, compassionate, these are the principles with which we all have to engage if we're going to have any hope of being able to solve the crises that face. The mindset that got us here is not going to be the mindset that's going to take us out of here.
Thank you much. We have 1 minute if anybody wants to add anything else. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next panel. Any other comments, please?
Just one thing, these are complex matters, but it struck me when I was at Dandora landfill the other day, and there is a wall painting and a graffiti saying, waste is basically valuable stuff out of place. To me, that sums up circularity.
Terrific. Anybody else? Final word?
I would actually like to just thank you guys for involving young people in such a high-level panel, because I really do see that when you do bring us into conversations with different sectors, it also opens our eyes to potential possibilities that exist, outside the space that or the sphere of influence that we usually have. And I think this was quite an interesting panel for me, at least, to see that there is possibility in the business sector that I already told you that we don't trust the most, but I do see that there is still a possibility of creating trust and creating change together. So thank you so much for that.
We're delighted to have you. And with that, I'd like to thank all the panelists from our first session. It was a great discussion. And we're going to move on now. So I'm going to ask all of you from the first session to kindly turn your cameras and microphones off. And for the panelists from session 2, to please turn your cameras and microphones on. And then we'll get started right away once we get everybody up and running here on our second session, which is going to focus on the circular economy and biodiversity sectoral dialogues, with a particularly sharp focus on construction and a bit more on textiles. So this session will last 30 minutes, and it's broken into these 2 subsections of 15 minutes each. And I'll ask each of our 6 speakers at least one question, and I'd please ask the speakers to limit their answer to no more than 2 minutes, as we did with the previous panel. And as time allows, we'd like to encourage brief comments on each speaker's intervention, similar to what we just did. But again, I'll have to be a little bit strict, so forgive me ahead of time if I have to stop you. Also, when answering, our speakers are invited to share examples, in particular, of where circularity is beginning to occur. Circularity is not an all or nothing thing. It's a process. And examples are really helpful to illustrate points and the significant potential for systemic change as examples are scaled, and the promotion of circularity and biodiversity goals regionally or even globally. So with that, I'd like to begin our first panel. This, as I mentioned, the session focuses on buildings and construction, and housing and infrastructure is among the largest consumers of resources for societal needs. And circularity can be effectively integrated and built into the built environment by pushing for building materials that reduce resource intensity as well as integrate with the natural environment. I mean, good practices in buildings can have a tremendous impact, including net zero energy buildings, use of renewable materials, repurposing of buildings, and recycled materials. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to plunge in to our questions. And in question 1, we'll go to Ms. Muskena Deputy Director General, Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment from South Africa. Ms. Skena, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay, well, welcome back. Housing and infrastructure is one of the largest consumers of resources for societal needs, and it puts tremendous pressure on the environment. So what policy measures is the South African government taking to reduce resource consumption in the built environment?
Yes, from South Africa's point of view, we have the National Waste Management Strategy that was adopted by our cabinet in 2020. And this strategy has prioritized construction and demolition waste, and it is informing our action in that space, which is also influencing green public procurement. You can imagine that our public infrastructure, we invest a whole lot as governments. So we needed to ensure that we influence our procurement that is leading by example. So we have put those policy measures in place. It's not only with regard to the waste management aspect, but we know that in the road construction, there are standards. We have also ensured that our KOTO standards, which inform the building of our roads, we have made sure that the eco-design specifies the percentage of secondary materials that needs to go in. So from that perspective, we are ensuring that the materials that are out of place, as discussed in the earlier session, we make sure that we influence that they are taken into building new infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Skena. I'm going to move on to question 2, and I'd like to, again, as we did in the last session, circle back at the end of our discussion as we have time to reflect on the comments. Question 2 goes to Dr. Thomas Matthias Rahm, architect engineer from Rahm Research, Plan Build, Austria. Mr. Rahm, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, well, welcome. Vienna is considered quote, a model environmental city, quote unquote, in Europe. What are some of the innovations in the construction sector that are lower carbon, more circular, and nature friendly?
Well, the major innovation has to take place on one side, on the material side, and on the other side is the planning side. So on the material side, I can tell you the major and the most important building material, of course, is concrete, and we have to find ways to reduce the carbon footprint of concrete. And we are just about to finish a research project with a major contractor here in Austria, and we managed to bring down 30% of the content of CO2 in a very ordinary concrete just by curing, taking more care of curing and nursing the fresh concrete. So I'm sure that reducing the CO2 in concrete is the major way we have to start with. And by the way, the Danish has made up a roadmap towards 2030 to reduce 50% of the CO2 content in concrete. So this is a major project. But on the other hand, let me tell you, the most important way on the other side, not on the material side, is the planning aspect. And there we have two scenarios. One is building on brownfields, and the other one is building on green fields. So when we build on green fields, we have to find a new way, an innovative way to treat these excavation materials, especially the soil. The soil is a super important resource we haven't discovered yet in the construction business. So we are talking about circular soil in Vienna, which is a concept of reusing the soil for other purposes like vegetation, substrates, and recultivation of other areas. And the other aspect is the brownfield. So in the planning perspective of brownfields, we have to have new concepts of applying these materials which exist on the site for our building purposes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ram. Let's keep those points in mind and move on to our third question to Dr. Carolyn Jewell, Biodiversity Senior Manager at Heidelberg Cement. Seems like a great segue, Ms. Jewell, for you. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you very much. So firstly, I'd like to thank you for inviting me onto this panel. I'm an ecologist by training, so for me to see biodiversity being talked about in such a forum is really exciting and such a great movement forward, as biodiversity was often seen as quite a silo topic. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's a lovely background you have there, by the way. Here's a question for you. So Heidelberg Cement is a global player in the industry. And how are actions taken by Heidelberg Cement in relation to circular economy? How is that linked to protecting nature and meeting the company's commitments on biodiversity?
So I think from what we've heard today and what we know from various publications, biodiversity really is in trouble. This is clear. And actions are really needed on the ground now if we're going to turn around this loss. And that forms the basis of Heidelberg Cement's biodiversity strategy, actually doing actions on the ground to turn around this loss of biodiversity. But I think we really need to look futurewards. We need to create an environment that nature can really thrive going forward, particularly as we see the 2050 vision coming through the global biodiversity framework. And I think circularity is key here. We need to set the right environmental parameters for nature to thrive. And in Heidelberg Cement, there are many ways I could talk for hours on what we're doing, but I want to focus particularly on how we're supporting the reduction in waste and also reducing our impact to land. So in terms of our impact to land, looking at alternative raw materials is really key for us. So looking at the viability of recycling concrete to make new concrete. And we have a product recently launched called Ecocrete, which offers up to 66% CO2 reduction, following on what Thomas was saying in his intervention, but also can have up to 10% recycled content. So I think this is a great example of the R&D that's going into this area. And in terms of alternative raw materials, so it's important for us to really help drive reduction in waste and make sure there's no downcycling. And we have a number of initiatives going on where we're working with communities and other partners on waste sorting. So an example is in Tanzania, we're working with Clean Hub, where we work with the locals to take non-recyclable plastics and use that as a fuel in our kilns. This is a co-processing exercise where once the plastics have been burnt, we can actually use the ashes as a clinker substitute. So real circular economy in action, which cleans up the local environment and supports our business needs.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jewell. Dr. Ram, just following from your intervention, I wondered if you had any additional thoughts to pose to Dr. Jewell or share with the group here around pathways to sustainability or circularity.
Yes, I would like to share some thoughts. We have to act on 3 fields of action. The first is, of course, closing the loops. This is clear because we have an average of a circular material use rate in Europe about 11.6%, which means 90% are still to go. So 11.6% for material use rate is less than we had 20 years ago. So closing the loop is the first field of action, and that means for us that we have to have new concepts of urban mining, of reducing the waste by using these materials. But the second field of action, which is even harder for us architects and planners, is to do more with less material. And this is so important because we have an input rate which is 3 times higher than the output rate. So every country is using much more than we could ever, even in the case that we close the loops, we just have 1/3 covered, yeah, and the other 2/3 we have to reduce by intelligent new approaches to planning. And then the third field of action is that we have to have more renewable resources in this input side. So closing the loops, less is more, and renewable resources, these are the ways that we have to start with in the construction business. And let me give you one example for urban mining, for closing the loops. This is the reason why we have invented Baukarussell, which is an initiative for social urban mining to generate employment in the demolition sector for social businesses. So social urban mining means that we can generate jobs and employment by this preparing demolition work covered by the added values that social urban mining can generate in this demolition objects by taking out, for example, the copper. Yeah, and the copper is selling the work of the people, of the social enterprises there. And this is the way also we can build up a market for reuse of building components. And this is what we do with Baukarussell in Vienna.
Thank you, Mr. Rum. We have about three minutes left. So Dr. Jewell, I would invite you to comment also, or Ms. Muskena. What are you hearing here that's interesting to you?
So from my point, one thing that I think starting to touch on, but I think what's really key is the partnerships that are made. We need innovative partnerships. There are so many different actors involved in the urban environment and developing the urban environment. And I just want to give a quick example of what we're doing in Sweden, where there's a big infrastructure project creating a tunnel. Of course, that includes the extraction of material, which potentially could be seen as waste, but we're being able to take that material and process it, use the rock to turn that into aggregate. But the key thing here is that's a simple solution, but there's lots of nitrogen from the explosives in that rock. And so we're creating wetlands where we can actually clean the water through a 2-year cycle in wetlands, which creates fantastic habitat for wildlife. And again, thinking about these nature-based solutions of how we approach circularity, I think is really important. So getting all the various actors together, I think is the only way that we're going to do this in a reasonable path that really supports nature.
Ms. Muskena, would you like to add anything or ask a question of these folks?
No, I would like to add and reinforce that we need long-lasting eco-design in terms of the input materials that goes into construction. It's very important to emphasize that we need those products that would last longer in the economy. We've noted that some of the trends in terms of whether it's designed through architects influence the consumption, but I think we need to make sure that our long-lasting eco-designs are instilled, and we need the industry to also come up with standards. It makes it easy for us to influence circularity. What I'm emphasizing is in South Africa, we have the Green Building Council that also puts out certification, and then incentives are out there. They put pressure in the industry to push for certification, and consumers, those that want green housing developments, then they are influenced in a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panelists. Unfortunately, we are now out of time, and there's a lot of directions we could go in here. But thank you very much for your interventions. And I would like to invite the panelists for the textile sector to please turn on your microphones and cameras, and our current panelists turn them off. And the brief context for this next 15-minute discussion is that the textile sector is one of the largest consumers of water, accounting for 93 billion cubic meters, as well as massive CO2 emitter, more than international flights and marine shipping combined. Fast fashion had a set pattern of consumption and disposal that seemed hard to break. But recently, awareness of the impact of clothing choices seems to be improving, with consumers demanding more circular products and companies implementing circular actions, such as reuse, recycling, prolonged lifetime, sustainably produced fibers, et cetera. So to dig into this opportunity, I'd like to start with a question to Ms. Leila Ben Ali, Minister of Energy Transition and Sustainable Development from Morocco. Ms. Ben Ali, can you hear me okay?
Unfortunately, Ms. Leila Ben Ali has a commitment as the upcoming president of the United States, and I'm representing her. I'm the director of Change, Biodiversity, and Green Economy in the same ministry.
Very good. Could you just mention your name, please? So we
Razi.
Okay, great. Welcome. Are you ready for your question? All right, here you are. The textile sector is one of the largest consumers of water and emitters of CO2, as I just mentioned. What circularity-related policy measures is the Moroccan government taking or planning to take to reduce the negative impacts of the textile sector on the environment, particularly on biodiversity and climate change?
Thank you, moderator, and thank you for inviting the Kingdom of Morocco to participate to these side events. So to answer to your question, Morocco has taken structural measures to integrate circularity in different sectors through its national strategy of sustainable development, which sets targets to achieve the transition to a green and inclusive economy by 2030. Operational measures are identified covering circular economy plans on water, energy, forests, agriculture, cities, transport, and waste. Besides legal reforms were launched, including the introduction of the extended producer responsibility within the framework of the National Waste Management Law, so that manufacturers are required to take responsibility for the entire life cycle of the products. The adoption, secondly, the adoption of the energy efficiency law, which aims to increase energy efficiency in the use of energy sources and avoid waste, reduce the costs, and mitigate the burden of energy consumption. In addition, the textile sector has benefits from the support of some regional and international cooperation programs, which aims to disseminate sustainable consumption and production methods. An ongoing program with UNIDO organization aims to develop a textile waste ecosystem map and identify business models and businesses partnerships for circular technology solutions with a national roadmap for textile waste valorization. Besides, we are currently working with private sector representatives to develop a public-private partnership program which aims to promote the emergence of the circular value chains through the establishment of an integrated green ecosystem for various products, including textile.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And I think it's a nice segue actually to a leader from the private sector who we have for question 2, Mr. Khalid Kairoush, Director for Quality and Sustainable Development, IVLAX from Morocco. Mr. Kairoush, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. You hear
Oh,
me?
great. Okay. Welcome. Here's your question. You're one of our private sector representatives, as I just mentioned. Why is it so important to implement circular actions in the textile sector from a sustainability perspective, and also from a business perspective? You know, what's your company doing in this area?
First, thank you for your invitation to this interesting meeting. I will review the video. Everything that has been said is very interesting and inspiring for us. The textile industry is one of the major consumers of water and water pollution, while the industry also emits significant amounts of CO2. This starts from agriculture and covers stages of clothing manufacturing, packaging, and transport all the way to the consumers. Recycling some of the waste and end-of-life clothing helps to preserve the environment. The result is less consumption of raw materials and therefore less need to produce natural or synthetic fibers, less need of agricultural land, which will preserve forests and more carbon to be stored in soil, and therefore preserving and regenerating an environmental conducive to supporting biodiversity, return of wildlife, and reduced carbon emissions. Reduced use of pesticides and insecticides, which will preserve the lands and microorganisms. And finally, this reduces landfilling and valorizes waste, which means creating jobs and new business opportunities. As part of SwitchMed program, we have launched two very important projects. The first one is to align our chemicals management with zero discharge of hazardous chemicals, ZDHC. This is a standard for more rational management oriented towards a strict minimum of environmental impact. We can detail this point if time permits. The second axis is that of the creation of an ecosystem to close the circle by recovering textile waste. We have begun with some trials and incorporating in the manufacturing process in Morocco. This is a project which needs and which requires several months of work. We are supported by by some European experts to develop an optimized process from the collection of the material, which can be integrated into finished products. Our product is mainly denim fabric. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Kairoush. I want to return after our next speaker to some more understanding of specific examples in the way your company is using circularity to create competitive advantage. But let's first hear from Ms. Caroline Nelson, country manager, CEO from H&M in South Africa. Ms. Nelson, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. As we all know, circularity in the textiles value chains is very important. What circularity action specifically is H&M taking to reduce the impact of the textile sector on the environment, particularly along its supply chain in South Africa?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. I think as a company, our vision is to lead the change towards circular and climate positive fashion. And our goal is to be climate positive throughout our value chain by 2040. So this is a massive ambition. But when you look at the organization and many of the initiatives we're taking, this kind of has to go through every single sector of how we're working. But within South Africa specifically, when you look at the value chain, we don't currently produce or manufacture here on any large scale. We only some smaller local collaborations. So where we can have a massive impact is more around the discussions of reduce, reuse, recycle, upcycling, and then trying to avoid garments ending up in landfill, which we've heard mentioned throughout the sessions today. One of the cool initiatives that we run here that has been really received well here is South Africa, obviously, not just is sustainability important, but also the social economic situation here. So we've managed to work with and start a program here that helps to not just help the environment, but also people within our communities as well. And globally, we run a program where customers can bring any old garments, it doesn't matter what it is, into our stores, and we take it and we recycle it. But in South Africa, we saw an opportunity in the market to help to grow some businesses, specifically within our township communities, where the garments that we take back into the stores, we then work with a program called Close to Good, who's based out of Gauteng, who help us to actually resell these garments through some women who work in our, they have micro businesses in our townships, and we educate them on a lot of different things. But basically the goal is to take these women out of poverty by reselling garments that could be reused that otherwise would have ended up in refill. And so it's a really cool program. Out of these women, a lot of them, 56 of them, have children with disabilities. So it's really about empowering women and getting them out of poverty, especially a very marginalized community. But then with anything that they can't resell, then those additional garments are then taken, and we actually use them to turn them into toys for children with disabilities. So we're reusing then the leftover fabric for that. And that's really cool. They're early childhood learning toys. And then with the very, very last pieces of fabric that are left that don't get turned into toys, then that is taken, and that is then used, recycled, and used in different industries like bedding, car manufacturing, etc. So it's a proper close the loop program that we've managed to work with here that's really having an impact on how we can do things and make it fully circular within the South African economy, which has been super well received.
Thank you very much. We have only a few minutes left, and I want to go back to Mr. Kairoush in a second, but Ms. Nelson, you opened up by talking a bit about your longer term goal. Was it a 2030 or 2035? Could you repeat that goal for us?
Yes. So the HM Group's aim is to be climate positive by 2040.
Okay. And why is it important from your perspective that companies have that bigger public goal? I mean, we hear about a lot of individual projects, but what is the goal? Why is that so important from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important for us. But we're a massive player in the fashion industry, right? So if we can change things, it can change everything. And we're living on a planet, obviously, where we have shortage of resources, we have climate crisis, we have like waste pollution, and the way we produce and consume fashion has to change. And if we don't do that as a company, the potential on the environment is huge. So it's as a company, we're transforming how we work and how we think, and that's why it's important. We want to be here for the long term. That's our goal, not just as a business, but as people as well.
Yeah, and it provides a way of measuring, doesn't it? Performance,
yes,
with all these little projects that are all important, but they add up to something that's measurable, right?
Exactly, super important.
Mr. Kairoush, I promised to come back, and I'd like to. I understand you may have an idea for the ministry, maybe a question that could help you. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Kairoush, to the discussion at this point? Mr. Kairoush, can you hear me okay?
Can you repeat this?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to come back to your business case for circularity.
Yes.
How does it matter in your business? And is there anything the ministry or the policymakers could do differently that would help you integrate circularity into your business model? We only have about a minute left. I'm sorry to leave you so little time, but if you could share with us, that'd be great.
Okay. So the valorization of waste locally in Morocco must and is more competitive and more sustainable. It is possible to stop the export of material, of waste, to regulate the markets and prices, and thus promote recycling locally in Morocco. And at the same time, will you also appreciate your kind support to the pilot projects, as we are doing in Evlox, to implement and to accelerate the upgrading of this activity?
Thank you very much, Mr. Kairoush, and thank you very much, distinguished panelists. That concludes our second sector focus session. And at this point, I'd like to pivot and offer the floor to Mazinger Anderson, Executive Director of Ianf, for some closing remarks. Ms. Anderson, are you there? I wonder, did we lose Ms. Anderson? Inger, can you hear us at all? It looks like we may have a slight delay in Ms. Anderson coming back. So with your permission, Ms. Anderson, are you there?
I am indeed.
Oh, hi, welcome.
Hi, good to see you. How are you?
Nice, good to see you too. Good to see you too. The floor is yours to pull these threads together for us.
Thank you so very much. And I am just delighted to be here and to be speaking from beautiful Nairobi, where we are having the United Nations Environment Assembly and where things are coming together, showing that multilateralism can in fact work. And one of the issues that you, of course, have been discussing today is circular economy and biodiversity. So let me start out by thanking Minister Yamaguchi, who is the Minister of Environment for Japan, for really leading the organization of this event, but also to all the Global Alliance members for circular economy and resource efficiency. And actually a special welcome to Gerd Müller, who's probably not online anymore, but who's my new colleague as USG of UNIDO. I certainly look forward to working with him. Look, and these are often repeated numbers and facts, but biodiversity is just depleting so fast. In less than half a century, half of the world's forests have gone. Half a century, it's gone. 1 million animals face extinction. We hear this over and over again. And maybe because of the repetition, these numbers have lost their ability to shock us. But they are shocking. They are shocking because what we have done to the planet is not long-term sustainable. We've operated on this basis that we can take things out of the earth for our well-being, for food, for medicine, for etc. But we've not understood the long-term sustainability. And that is where we have to understand that a good starting point for businesses and for policymakers is to begin to account for the impact that our footprint has on nature as we go about building economies, building jobs, building circularity, and obviously reducing poverty. How do we then think about circularity in buildings and construction? And when I say that, I'm talking about cement, I'm talking about sand. Let us not build something and then when we tear it down, what do we do with it? We make it into a landfill. Whereas, of course, we should build it and make sure that once it is in the built environment, if we need to change things, we recycle the materials that have been in previous construction. And we can do that for plastic, whilst we also need to refuse and reduce and reuse. And we can do that for construction, we can do that for mobility, we can do that for textiles, and we can do that for fashion and for food. And if we make that shift, really make it as a global community, then we can take out huge chunks of greenhouse gas emissions. We can take out significant expansion, lateral expansion that we're doing today in land and resource use, and obviously reduce pollution. And then we will get on top of the triple planetary crisis. So later this year, we will hopefully all meet in Kunming to agree on the post-2020 biodiversity framework. We say post-2020, but we're in 2022 because of this global pandemic. So we don't have time on our side. And that framework has to be ambitious, implementable, means of implementation, clearly monitorable, all the things we say. Why? Because we can't just agree on this in a bubble of environment ministers. We need to have agreement on this with industry, with the consumers of the environment, which means the construction sector, the textile sector, et cetera, as I just mentioned. These things are connected. That is why we agreed to it in 1992 in the Rio Summit. That is why these multilateral environmental dimension cannot be treated individually. And circularity and circular economy is a big key that offers a massive solution to what we are facing right now. So right now, here in Nairobi, hopefully in less than about an hour or two, we will see a gavel go down, and that gavel will go down on the world having agreed to establish a legally binding instrument that will deal with plastic pollution from source to sea, will move on circular economy. Let that be the bell that rings, so that this will be the time that we understand that circularity is part of our responses to the climate crisis, to the biodiversity crisis, and obviously to the pollution crisis. And let us learn from this, and let us design products then for reuse and for ensuring their effective and efficient and less energy intensive reuse. Let us remove hazardous materials from the materials that now need to circulate in our economy, so that we can do it expeditiously. Now, we can't wait for that agreement to get into force, the plastics agreement. Every country, it is in its distinct interest to step up. Every business, it is in their distinct interest to step up. And I'll tell you what, shareholders, consumers, activists are already voting with their spending or voting with their investments, because you do not want to be associated with yesterday's polluters. You want to be associated with tomorrow's cleaner products. So friends, as the UN Secretary General has said last year when he launched the Common Agenda, he said, humanity faces a stark and urgent choice: break down or break through. And here, clearly, circularity offers us a clear shot at that breakthrough. Let's not waste it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anderson. That's a fantastic note to leave us on, circularity becoming a business imperative. I'd like to thank all of our distinguished panelists, speakers, and our audience for your participation in the second high-level meeting of the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency. And while we may not have had time to get to many of the questions posed by the audience, each will be considered and addressed, if at all possible, offline. I'd like to wish you all a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Goodbye for now.